Allow me then to extend a special greeting to our keynote speaker, Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Dr. Grace Naledi Mandisa Pandor. Dr. Pandor holds numerous accolades and qualifications from various academic institutions, nationally, on the continent, and abroad. She's, of course, also not a stranger to us at the University of Cape Town, having been a senior lecturer in our academic support program. And I must add, this is many moons ago. I would like to also acknowledge all our honored guests, respected government representatives, my colleagues from the higher education sector, and all who are here in person today, as well as those who are joining us through live stream. Today we'll be addressing a topic that I'm sure is integral to the work that we all do. Removing obstacles from our continent's path to prosperity is a monumental challenge that all of us should be committed to. Recognizing, of course, that this challenge has its roots in the legacy of colonialism, and for South Africa, as a consequence, apartheid. This recognition, however, does not mean that we absolve ourselves from current accountability failures as leaders. Though it seems that much time has passed, we are but a young democracy. But as young a democracy as we are, we should be resolute in installing a future for ourselves that we envisaged during our earnest struggle years. And here, when I say ourselves, it is critical to mention that I include the entire African continent and our kin in the global south. We face challenges born of common causes, and our best hope, therefore, is in working together, pulling our strengths and wisdom to build, learn, and prosper. The formation of the African Union in Durban 20 years ago on the 9th of July was, of course, a seminal development in fostering unity. Indeed, this public lecture was timed deliberately to commence our commemoration of the birth of the African Union. At the University of Cape Town, we have firmly positioned ourselves to work towards the Pan-Africanist future that we want. Our unfolding plan that we have called Vision 2030 makes explicit the need for us to shape our research, teaching, and staff recruitment in ways that support our vision of an unapologetically African institution. A university that is located in Africa, not just physically, but in spirit, and that can be trusted to produce knowledge that benefits humanity. I'm pleased to note that in acknowledging our rootedness in Africa and the responsibility we carry as a university to tackle challenges with global implications, our Faculty of Health Sciences marked Africa Month yesterday, reflecting on what the future of healthcare in Africa might look like. As an institution, we have also made it our mission to dismantle our own colonial legacy, which for decades informed what we teach, who does the teaching, and what we ignore. Our attention has now turned towards that which we have ignored for far too long. And this has begun to enrich our curricula, classrooms, research, and staff rooms immeasurably. Our Faculty of Humanities, who are co-hosting this forum, is also working deliberately to facilitate meaningful engagements in Africa involving researchers from around the world. The faculty envisions itself, as does the university, as a Pan-African decolonial research-intensive institution that uses its resources, networks, and capabilities to teach and research, aiming to produce scholars and knowledge that rise to the challenges such as the one we have on the table today. It is necessary that we envision and position ourselves in this way. There's no other option if we are serious about preparing a future that will be just for all. Now, I know that I'm not the only one who cannot wait to hear what Minister Pandor has prepared for us on these matters. I won't take any more of your time, and I ask you to please help me welcome Minister Dr. Naledi Pandor to the podium.
So good evening, everybody. It's so interesting to be here at the Graduate School of Business. Just a week or two ago, I was very upset with the EFF because they said I'm old and I should get out of politics and go and look after my grandchildren. They're probably right. But I feel I have something to offer. But as I stand here and remember the day that we opened this building, I kind of do feel that maybe I am old. Because, you know, when UCT was discussing setting up a facility like this and converting this, when V&A Waterfront was still just being developed, didn't imagine that it would become what it has become today, such an incredible business school. So I do feel, yeah, I've been around a bit too long, and maybe, you know, maybe time has come. I also remember things like, you know, when they were doing candidate selection in the political parties in late 1993, and I had just been confirmed as a permanent senior lecturer. I got tenure at the University of Cape Town. I was very proud of myself. And I was very involved in ANC politics on the education side and was very active in this province. So at some point, I was called in and told, you've emerged as one of the very popular possibilities for Parliament. And so we want to put you up. I told them, I'm an academic. You know, I intend to become a professor, and my ambition is to be a vice chancellor, deputy vice chancellor. And, you know, and that's where I'm aiming, you know. And I remember the leadership in the room saying, no, but the people have selected you and believe you'll make a contribution. So anyway, off I go to Professor Saunders, who was the vice chancellor then. And I said to him, Prof, I've just been told by the ANC that I'm in the top of their list of candidates and that I'm really needed and I should agree. So I'm considering it, but I just want to check with you. Will you allow me to continue lecturing on a part-time basis? He said, he looked at me and he said, Naledi, you'll be far too busy as a politician to be concerned about lecturing, but we'd love to have you. But I can tell you, my girl, what, you know, he liked calling us my girl. Tell you, my girl, once you settle in, you will not have any time. And in fact, he was quite correct anyway. So lots of memories, and probably EFF is right. But anyway, very thrilled to be here. Professor Shose Kesi, the Dean of Humanities at the University of Cape Town. I must say things have changed in my time. I can't imagine that we would have two senior Black women leading an occasion an occasion of this nature. Deputy Vice Chancellor, congratulations on your appointment, and given developments in our province, I'm sure you know there's a lot of work associated with the task that you've been given, and we wish you well in your work. Guests from the university community, senior officials from the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, and ladies and gentlemen, let me really express my profound gratitude to you for allowing me to speak to you this evening and to share with you our commemorative thoughts of the 20th anniversary of the African Union, right here at this fantastic academic institution of South Africa, the University of Cape Town. We're truly honored as DIRCO to be here and appreciates the leadership role that this institution has played and continues to play as a center of academic excellence. Well, we're here tonight to celebrate our continent and to focus on how best we can be the instrument to help achieve the key goals of Agenda 2063 by working hard at removing blockages, and there are many, to our collective prosperity before we reach the African Union's centenary. Time is running out, and we need to work hard at achieving the changes that we desire. There are many attributes on the African continent that are important for us to acknowledge and celebrate. As Africans, we proudly claim Africa as the cradle of humankind. Our continent has an incredibly rich history and heritage, and just a visit to Marupeng reveals the impressive historical exhibitions which detail how modern Homo sapiens emerged over 200,000 years ago. We have some of the earliest fossils of our species found in South Africa, but also in Ethiopia, as well as in South Africa. We have the rich heritage that we all know of the Egyptian civilization. We also only have to look at the city of Timbuktu in now very troubled central Mali to understand the depth of African history and how it was once one of the world's greatest cities from the period 1300 to 1600 AD, when it was the center of Arab-African trade and Islamic scholarship under the Great Mali Empire. Timbuktu's university was a center of learning that drew people from all over Africa and the Middle East. Africa is also endowed with rich natural resources, which have been the envy of great powers around the world and a source of grief for our continent. The continent currently has 40% of the world's gold and up to 90% of its chromium and platinum. The largest reserves of cobalt, diamonds, platinum, and uranium in the world are in Africa. Our continent also holds 65% of the world's arable land, and yet it is the hungriest, and 10% of the planet's internal renewable freshwater resources. If we harness the potential of our vast arable land, it could become a source of economic prosperity for us and food security for our people. As we commemorate Africa Month, we must recognize and celebrate all these remarkable attributes of our continent, but I wish to argue we must make good out of them, and we haven't done so as yet. During Africa Month, we of course pay special tribute to the leadership role played by the founders of the Organization of African Unity and the role that Africans played in the fight against oppression, colonialism, and apartheid. Their selfless sacrifices and the hardship they endured in the fight against apartheid will always be engraved in our hearts. If you don't understand sacrifice and hardship under apartheid, I suggest you buy the biography of Ibrahim and read it, because he describes life under apartheid for a freedom fighter. And you will get a sense of the depth of depravity and pain that was the experience under apartheid. So I think it's important that we do acknowledge that there's been much sacrifice and much hardship, and that these must be memories that we record in order to build a better South Africa and a better Africa. It was visionary leaders such as Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, and Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, whose dream of a united and prosperous Africa laid a foundation for the establishment of the Organization of African Unity. Their vision also inspired the calibration of the OAU Charter into, in the future, the Constitutive Act of the African Union of 2000, as well as the establishment of the African Economic Community, whose roadmap birthed landmark initiatives such as the regional economic communities and the establishment of the now Africa Continental Free Trade Area. We also had the vision of the Abuja Treaty, which came into force in 1994. It envisioned the establishment of 3 financial institutions that will lay the basis for implementation of Africa's Continental Free Trade Area. These institutions are the creation of an African Central Bank, the creation of an African Investment Bank, and the establishment of an African Monetary Fund. We still have to do much work to create these institutions, but we were talking about them all those years ago, 1994, spelt out in the Abuja Treaty. The leaders of the continent have developed a roadmap, which they have said will take the continent into post-2063. But I believe that it's important that we take on the role to implement the necessary programs and actions that will get us there. The continent is not short, as I have illustrated, of plans, projects, and ambitious goals. Its real challenge is execution, and we need to pay more attention to that. You all might remember in January 2014, in a place called Bahir Dar in Ethiopia, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma presented a letter to a meeting of foreign affairs ministers of the Executive Council of the African Union. This letter was labeled Agenda 2063, an email from the future. In this letter, Dr. Dlamini-Zuma, who was the chairperson of the African Union Commission, addressed Kwame Nkrumah, informing him of the progress Africa would have achieved by 2063. I'd like to quote some of the milestones outlined in that letter she wrote, that email from the future to Kwame Nkrumah. She proposed that by 2063, Africa would be united in that it would have formed the Confederation of African States, that our youth would have played a strong agitating role for the integration of Africa. I don't see our youth objecting to Operation Dudula, but according to her, they would be responsible for promoting the integration of Africa and African people. The implementation of the Abuja Treaty would have been accelerated and an integrated African economic community realized. Fourthly, we would be beneficiating our mineral resources in Africa through a strong manufacturing and industrialization base. Fifthly, rural agriculture would be fully integrated in a buoyant agro-industry based on Africa's fertile and large river systems. Sixth, the green economy, the blue economy, the ICT industry would be the backbone of the continent's economy. And Africa would finally be the author of its own narrative. What a fantastic set of goals, which all of us would love to appropriate, but how difficult they're proving. Subsequently, the African Union heads of state and government adopted a 50th anniversary solemn declaration that pledged their commitment to prosperity and peace on the continent, as well as the integration of these ideals and goals into their country's national development plans. And also agreed that they would frame an implementation program of the Continental Agenda 2063. This would be accomplished through a people-driven process toward a prosperous Africa at peace with itself. They began a process of consultation, which saw institutions of higher learning, think tanks, governments, and civil society making contributions to an African discourse, which led to the adoption of Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. Agenda 2063 sets out a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. Integrated continent, I mentioned earlier, a politically united one based on the ideals of Pan-Africanism and the African Renaissance. The vision for the continent is a vision of good governance, respect for human rights, justice and the rule of law, peace and human security, and people-driven development. The agenda also identifies flagship projects to propel the continent towards sustained development and prosperity. Its projects, and I have seen the plans, include an extensive infrastructure build, the establishment of the African Continental Free Trade Area, the creation of a single African currency, establishment of cybersecurity processes, the adoption of an Encyclopedia Africana, among others, to help us understand our own identity and record it. AU member states are expected to adopt all these aspirations and each contribute toward their implementation. And we could take each of the projects and actually be able to identify in each African country an attempt in at least one of them. So something is happening. But the question is, how can we move the momentum to achieve massive continental impact? We have a 10-year implementation plan as the African Union, and the Commission is charged with monitoring and providing progress reports to heads of state and government summits on an annual basis. When we assumed the chairship of the African Union as South Africa in February 2020, President Ramaphosa outlined strategic priorities which he said South Africa was going to pursue during our chairship. He addressed the African Union when we assumed the chair and said, As Africans living in this new era, we shoulder the greatest of responsibilities to ensure that Africa's wealth does not become her poverty, that her blessing does not become her curse, and that our endowment does not become our downfall. He indicated that the focus for South Africa during its chairship would be on silencing the guns, because he argued that without peace, we cannot have development. He argued that we would work at advancing inclusive economic growth, and particularly the inclusion of women, and that we would seek to expand and argue for expanded continental trade, the strengthening of democracy and good governance on the continent, as well as combating violence against women and girls. I remember the puzzled look on some of the heads of state when he called them into a meeting to get a country commitment from each head of state on combating violence against women and girls. And I thought it was a very important meeting and very interesting discussion by presidents of what each of their countries must do to increase action against gender-based violence. But of course, all those very lofty ambitions were hit within a month by the catastrophic COVID-19 pandemic. We had grand plans, but after announcing them at the African Union Summit, came home end of February, beginning of March, we had the first case of COVID-19. By 6th of March, 10. By end of March, 100. And our chairship was no longer really the key focus. It led that pandemic to global lockdowns, even African lockdown, restrictions on international travel, and interruption of exchange of goods and services in trade. I believe as Africa, we've learned many lessons from the challenges that the pandemic presented to the continent, most particularly the need to strengthen our comparatively weak public health systems. We were all affected by the pandemic, and we really need to address the disparities, particularly evident during the pandemic, in decent quality healthcare access. This was a big problem for our people. There are also other impediments arising from the pandemic that I think we need to give attention to. For example, in South Africa, we were quite able at responding to the needs of businesses, formal business that had to close down. Immediately had a package, could assist with relief. Many of them had insurance provision. But the largest source of income to the marginalized person in South Africa is the informal business sector. And when we had strict lockdown, nobody paid attention to those women. Those women who trade on the pavement, who trade at the taxi ranks, could not get any subsistence during the lockdown. Most African countries don't have a vibrant insurance system, and so they were unable to assist even their formal business sector. So the issue of insurance came up as a very important issue that we need to address as the continent. Of course, alongside the weaknesses pointed to by COVID-19, there are other pressing challenges that Africa must give attention to. One of these is the escalating impact of climate change, which we've seen in South Africa in the past few weeks. The destructive impact of Cyclone Idai in Malawi, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. And then we had Cyclone Kenneth in Mozambique in 2019. These suggest that natural disasters are likely to reverse our developmental gains as the continent. Most recently, Madagascar has suffered hugely following a devastating set of tropical cyclones earlier this year. And of course, in our own country, We lost over 400 people in KwaZulu-Natal, killed by the floods that wrought devastation on public and private infrastructure. So the matter of climate change has to be featured into the plans we have for Agenda 2063. We also, despite the abundant water resources in our continent, read continuously about water distress levels in South Africa, about water shortages and droughts in other parts of the continent, which droughts have led to intercommunal conflicts over grazing lands. We need to pay attention to East African countries such as Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia, which continue to experience locust invasions that destroy crops and vegetation, drastically affecting food security. All of these inadequacies occur alongside the extensive endowments we referred to earlier. I think our higher education institutions and think tanks need to devote more time to exploring why we fail to make progress and not devising more plans. We have enough plans. What is it that causes us not to be able to make good on them? I believe we do have new prospects for success, most particularly the agreement to establish the African Continental Free Trade Area. This is a milestone achievement for the African Union and I believe for the entire continent. When fully implemented, not if, the free trade area will greatly improve intra-African trade, which is currently between 10 to 12%. It will enhance industrialization and strengthen continental and regional value chains. The pace of economic growth and development on the continent rests on the success of the free trade area. And it is imperative that as Africans we should embrace and support its full implementation. So as South Africa, we must accept that we cannot just be the dominant economy in our neighborhood that everybody draws goods from. We've got to learn to share manufacturing capacity with other countries on the continent and agree what is done and produced in South Africa, what could be done and produced in Botswana, in Lesotho, and so on. And how do we assist Lesotho to manufacture, to industrialize, and so on. These are questions we must ask ourselves if we are serious about African trade integration. We also have to guard against any efforts to derail us in achieving our goals and objectives. I'm sure you're aware that it wasn't easy to get full agreement on the African Continental Free Trade Area. As African countries, we tend to have a tendency to use sovereignty as some form of defense mechanism rather than an attribute that can assist us in achieving our development goals. So when we ask that we look at rules of origin, countries don't really want to reveal that they get those goods from China a lot of the time and they're just packaging them and it looks like it comes from a local country. We need to get over this fear and accept that to achieve the key objectives of the African Continental Free Trade Area, we're going to have to produce our own goods. We're going to have to set aside some aspects of sovereignty and really attach to integration of Africa. It's pleasing, therefore, that the AFCFTA has been ratified by 41 out of the 55 countries of the African Union. That the legal framework has already been agreed upon, including protocols on trade in goods and services, as well as a protocol on procedures for the settlement of disputes. The trade negotiations aimed at finalizing rules of origin are at an advanced stage of completion. I'm informed that preparations have also resumed on finalizing our own commitments on trade in services under the free trade area. These would cover key sectors such as finance, tourism, communication, and professional services. There are also consultations underway on protocols covering support to vulnerable groups such as women and youth to unlock opportunities in entrepreneurship for these groups. Of course, we've had a good 2 or 3 years where we've been able to focus on the African continental free trade area and the programs under Agenda 2063. In recent summits, we were able to devote very close attention to the infrastructure programs under Agenda 2063, to initiatives directed at mitigation and adaptation on climate change, green economy. So we had very robust and positive discussions in these areas. However, most recently, the war between Russia and Ukraine has really shaken us and is causing great concern on the continent, particularly with respect to global supply value chains. And it has the possibility of disrupting our focus and the progress we had achieved recently. We have countries on the continent which are dependent on Russia and Ukraine for wheat and agricultural input, such as seed fertilizers. And the supply has suddenly been disrupted. We import as South Africa crude oil, diesel, and related chemicals from Russia and Ukraine. And recently we export massive amounts of citrus to them. The flow of these products has been negatively affected. This for us underscores the need for greater levels of intra-African trade so that as a continent we increasingly become more self-reliant and are not shaken by these global movements. The heads of state and government of the African Union, in discussing the future in 2013, made an undertaking to us as Africans that they won't bequeath the burden of conflicts to the next generation of Africans. They committed to speed up the process of attaining the objectives of African economic communities and to take steps toward the construction of a united and integrated Africa, and also agreed to move with speed toward integration and merger of the regional economic communities as the building blocks of the Union. We're also aware that the speeding up of the development of infrastructure on the continent is critical if we are to achieve an integrated and prosperous Africa by 2063 and beyond. We need to build proper roads, rail, ports, tourism infrastructure as key drivers of economic integration at national, regional, and continental level. Doesn't help if you deliver a whole set of goods and products to a country and that country doesn't have roads to penetrate into 100 kilometers of their territory. Doesn't help trade. So the matter of roads, movement of goods, absolutely important. As South Africa, we play quite a key role. For example, we've hosted the AUDA NEPAD office since it was created 20 years ago. The AUDA, African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, plays an important role and is key to unlocking our continent's economic potential by facilitating and coordinating the implementation of regional and continental priority development programs and projects, as well as assisting Africa to secure development partnerships, resource mobilization, and appropriate research and knowledge management. I must say the outgoing CEO, Dr. Miyake, has done an incredible job, and we look forward to the woman CEO who will now lead AUDA NEPAD, Dr. Bekele Thomas, in continuing and building on that foundation. Another key African Union agency that we take pride in and whose mandate South Africa must continue to support is the African Peer Review Mechanism, or APRM. The APRM plays a fundamental role in the promotion of good governance and democracy across the continent. Since its establishment, it has registered significant progress, with more than 41 African Union member states voluntarily acceding to the mechanism and subjecting themselves to periodic review in terms of political, economic, and corporate governance. Mechanism has created the potential for holding leaders accountable. We've just concluded the validation of our second report, and it's going to be ready for submission to the APRM and the African Union very soon. So these are important decades, but they will come to nothing. And our Agenda 2063 vision will become a pipe dream if we do not decisively deal with the constant challenge of conflicts in several hotspots on the continent. This is our biggest problem. These conflicts have become a permanent feature in the agenda of the African Union since its creation. The priority of strengthening development, particularly that of addressing unprecedented levels of poverty in our continent, has often had to take a back seat to our focus on silencing the guns and ending conflict. We also have flagrant violations of human rights on our continent, and these continue to remain a stubborn stain on the tapestry of commendable work that the African Union continues to do on the continent. It's striving hard, the AU. They work really hard. And we let them down, some of our countries. The unconstitutional changes of government and the re-emergence of coup d'etat in the past year doesn't bode well for the long-term integration and socio-economic development of Africa. The coups coupled with the long-running conflicts in Eastern DRC, in Sudan, in South Sudan, in the Central African Republic, have undermined African Union efforts to silence the guns. Closer to home, the ongoing insurgency in the Cabo Delgado province of Mozambique is a great worry, and it threatens the security and stability of the entire SADC region. We took very long as SADC discussing the insurgency in Cabo Delgado. Many of us were convinced we needed to act and act speedily, but there was a reluctance to allow, that thing of sovereignty, to allow entry by others, even by SADC. Eventually, we did manage to convince, and I was very happy that we did, because my colleagues from Nigeria kept saying to me, don't take long. Why are you dilly-dallying as Southern Africa? That's what we did. We thought Boko Haram was just a small threat, and we took long. By the time we realized that it was a problem, it had become huge. So don't take long. So I'm very glad that eventually SADC agreed and Mozambique agreed that we must establish a SADC mission in Mozambique to combat this insurgency. We also do recognize the role that ECOWAS has played, a very strong role in its region, in dealing decisively with coups in the region, and SADC in Cabo Delgado, where our men and women are doing an amazing job. Of course, I must mention that as South Africa, we remain extremely concerned about the humanitarian consequences of conflicts on the continent, particularly the displacement of women and children, especially in the region of the Sahel, in the Eastern DRC, and in Central Africa. The conflicts have huge implications for livelihoods, and for social cohesion in the affected areas. We therefore fully support, as South Africa, the upcoming African Union Summit on humanitarian assistance, where countries are going to be asked to pledge to support humanitarian efforts on the African continent. And I hope that if I pledge from the African Renaissance Fund, you won't take me to court. Conference will be in Equatorial Guinea at the end of this month. We have indicated that we will participate and reaffirm our commitment to support fellow Africans that are in humanitarian distress. We believe, ladies and gentlemen, that the African Union has laid a solid foundation for the implementation of Agenda 2063, and that we as countries and states and governments need to support them, and that should we do so with intent, we will support the continent to finally realize its potential. However, our view is the success of the African Union will be hollow if Agenda 2063 is not fully domesticated at regional and national levels by all member states and by African communities in general. We will have, as South Africa, to continue to advocate for the alignment of Agenda 2063 with our own national development plan, as well as national development plans across the continent. And it's so exciting to see each of the countries now having very well-crafted development plans, which they're beginning to implement. We also must ensure African coordination and that we synchronize with the continental agenda. Let me say in conclusion that we should not relent in our commitment to silence the guns by 2030, that we should not relent in speeding up regional integration, that we must work hard at fully implementing the African Continental Free Trade Area while accelerating the rollout of infrastructure development across the continent. And development is taking place. We must ensure that we make good on ensuring economic prosperity for our fellow Africans and our general populations, and we can only do this through African integration. Let me conclude by quoting former President Thabo Mbeki, who boldly captured the spirit which has to permeate throughout the continent as we celebrate Africa Day. He said, "Whatever the moment, nothing can stop us now. Whatever the difficulties, Africa shall be at peace. However improbable it may sound to the skeptics, Africa will prosper." Let's make those words real. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Pandor, for that inspiring presentation. The Minister has kindly agreed to take some questions. So, there's a roving mic. If you have a question, please raise your hand.
Hi, Minister. Peter Fabricius from the Daily Maverick. Thank you for your talk. A couple of questions, if I may. The one is that local media reported recently that something like hundreds of Islamic State fighters had returned from Iraq and Syria to South Africa with the assistance, the active assistance of the government, which has given them new identities, etc. And I just wondered if you could confirm that and comment on it. On Eswatini, the president came back from a meeting with the king last November and announced that there would be SADC involvement in the national dialogue, and we were expecting that this would be discussed at the recent SADC summit, but the king seems to have pulled out of it. I just wondered if you could update us on where that stands. And also, if I may, on your efforts to normalize relations with Rwanda, which was also, I believe, a presidential mandate. Thank you.
Okay. He shouldn't really be asking questions. He's a journalist. But anyway, all right. I saw that story about ISIS fighters. There are no hundreds of ISIS fighters or even one that have been assisted by the security agencies to return to South Africa. What there are women and children who are in a refugee camp in northern Syria that we would like to get back to our country, but we don't have hundreds of ISIS fighters who have been brought back to South Africa. On Eswatini, we'd agreed, as you would recall, President Ramaphosa had announced that the SADC Troika would develop a terms of reference that we would provide to Eswatini as assistance in helping them to conceptualize an inclusive national dialogue. We have adopted that terms of reference. It's been agreed to by the summit that was held in Malawi, and we have submitted the TORs to the government of Eswatini and to His Majesty the King. They asked for an opportunity to study the terms of reference further, hence asking not to be at the summit, to have Eswatini on the agenda, as they would like to reflect more and come back to SADC on it at our next meeting of the organ. So that's where the matter is. On Rwanda, we've had very good engagements, myself and Minister Biruta, as well as our various intelligence chiefs. And I think we are now discussing a solution to the consular services, because that's the key issue. Ensuring that Rwandese nationals can travel to South Africa, South Africans to Rwanda, in a manner that both countries are satisfied, respects and assures the security of each one. So we've had very good discussions, and I'm hopeful.
Any further questions? We do have a few students on the room, so we would like to hear from you.
My question is in Agenda 2063, in what measures is the government putting in place to facilitate that and make sure that private sector investments are protected, but also that there are active investments in the infrastructure? And then perhaps an interest on the Grand Inga project and what South Africa's role is and where we are with that project.
On the private sector, we continue to engage them as the African Union, and particularly through the African Union Development Agency, we have a very robust engagement. On the procedures and mechanisms relevant to the African Continental Free Trade Area, we've been working with African banks, for example, financial institutions, and looking at the automatic payment system and their participation within it. The reserve banks, the central banks have also been part of that discussion. So absolutely, you know, the private sector has a key role to play in development. I was really thrilled recently. We had a series of visits led by the president to West African countries. And I was really pleased to note the presence of South African companies involved with a lot of infrastructure initiatives, roads, bridges, rail, electricity, in many countries in West Africa, particularly in Ghana, which I think has been really astute in how it manages private sector participation in Ghana and how the government partners with the private sector. So you see there the presence of, I think, over 120 South African companies employing over 44,000 people. So it's very good use of the private sector for development initiatives. On investment protection, this is sometimes, you know, a sore subject because you don't get investment protection elsewhere, but as soon as it's African, suddenly you want a whole lot of things where we bear responsibility for your likely business failures. So it's a point that we're looking at a framework that doesn't place an undue and on African countries, because that tends to be of the current nature of investment protection agreements. We've been a bit wary of them in South Africa because we didn't find they worked for us. But we do believe you need to assure business, but you must find a model where you don't then take on obligations that no government should really take on. On the Grand Inga, less said about it, the better. It's an important project that I think we should make progress on, but it's been bedeviled by many, many different interest groups, companies, countries. One of the aspects I didn't really discuss in the lecture, which I think is a mistake on my part, is external influence in the negative forces in Africa. And a project like the Grand Inga attracts a lot of negative external interest. So there has been a difficulty in really agreeing who the partners are and how they work together. We have signaled to the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo that as South Africa, we remain interested because we believe it's a very important project. And I think we've found a greater interest in engaging with South Africa in President Tshisekedi on the Grand Inga. So I'm hoping we will make progress. We'll be going there middle of the year for an official visit, at which I hope we'll take the discussion to the next level.
My name is Rashad, and I'm an UCT alumni as well as a PhD candidate at UWC. I would like to ask about the African Union passport that was planned to be introduced. Do you think by 2063, the African states, members of the African Union, can use one single passport? And I also would like to ask, does African Union has any plans to harmonize the laws between the member states?
On the passport, we are keen to work toward a single passport. But for South Africa, we believe the most important step is first to identify all our nationals, every African country. So we should have a civil population register. Many countries don't have it. You can't have a passport available to everybody when you don't know who you're giving it to. And so we've been arguing for really working together to ensure that everybody's registered, they have a basic national ID, then we'll happily have an African passport. But before we know what we're dealing with, we are concerned. Not that we're against the idea of the passport, but it's the arrangements that lead you there that we think need to be addressed much more than they have at the moment. I can't remember the second question. Oh, harmonization of laws. Yes, indeed. This is something that we have been discussing. But again, I think it is bedeviled by having very different systems. But the protocols that we've developed over the years, which are now quite extensive, have created a basis for greater harmonization. Where I find that there are difficulties is in the justice sector. Matters of extradition and so on, the human rights platform. So those tend to pose greater difficulties because we have very different approaches to human rights. For example, we're very strong on gender equality. In South Africa, we're firm in terms of our constitution on sexual orientation not being a subject for discrimination. Other countries don't share similar approaches to those rights. And so it's often difficult to finally arrive at a shared juristic perspective. But it is something we're working toward. And now we have, as I said, many, many protocols where our laws are beginning to align, I think, in a more exciting possibility of alignment across the continent, especially in agriculture, water, in education. We've done a great deal on recognition of qualification. So there are sectors that are easier, but there are some that I think are far more complex.
Minister, thank you so much. Can you please join me in thanking the Minister for her presentation?
Thank you very much for.
Fantastic, thank you. Before you leave, just a few last words from me. Thank you again to Minister Pandor for your insightful and inspiring remarks. It was very interesting to hear you highlight the need for cooperation on this continent and the key contradictions between ideals and plans and the challenge of execution. I think these thoughts have really nicely set the scene for tomorrow's panel discussion, and we look forward to hearing more then. I would like to also take this opportunity to thank the DIRCO team for choosing UCT to host this public lecture. It's been an absolute pleasure working with you. And on the UCT side, I'd like to thank my colleague Yusuf Omar and our CMD team, as well as all the staff here at the Graduate School of Business for putting this together at such short notice and for the smooth running of the event. Thank you to all of you for coming this evening, and I hope to see some of you tomorrow. Have a good evening further. Thank you very much.